I had been waiting for something all year. Every second it wasn't out, I anticipated the moment it would be. Sometimes I'd forget about it, and sometimes I'd actively seek out any news about it. But eventually, there was a day when it was finally made available. That something? The version 2 update for the Hypno's Lullaby mod. Specifically one song from it, Brimstone. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, this mod was for a game called Friday Night Funkin', which I don't think needs any explanation. It's about as prevalent as microplastics in our body. The song in question, Brimstone, was based on the creepypasta known as Buried Alive. And a snippet of the song was released earlier this year, which got me excited. When I finally heard the song and saw the gameplay, I was fairly satisfied. And I began to read YouTube comments on the very same video I saw the gameplay from. There was someone asking for an explanation on all the creepypastas featured in the mod, and a single reply. Curious myself, I read through it and I saw something stupid. This person was attempting to say that the Buried Alive creepypasta originated from a real sprite found in the files of the first generation Pokemon games. Reading this hurt me on several levels. 1, it was blatant misinformation, and 2, I will explain 2 a little while later. After this, I was brought back to an idea that I had already attempted prior. It was a video about the creepypasta in question, Buried Alive. The video idea had already hit me once before, back in May of 2022, but it never really went anywhere. I think it was the way I formatted the script. But I think I'm finally ready to tackle this, and hopefully unspread all the misinformation that exists. Every story has its story, right? So what is the story of Buried Alive? Well, going off of the Creepypasta Wiki, what we're actually looking to read is the Buried Alive model. Said story goes as follows. The Buried Alive model, often referred to as its code, the Buryment script, was to be found on the final story of the Pokemon Tower, in what has been replaced with the Marowak Ghost. According to the scripts assigned to it, the Buried Alive model was intended to be the boss of the tower. Once reaching the top floor, the following conversation would have taken place.
You're here. I'm trapped, and I'm lonely. So very lonely. Won't you join me?
After this, the battle would have been initiated. Once in battle view, the Buried Alive model appears to be a decaying human corpse attempting to crawl out of the ground. It has been programmed to have 2 white hands, a Gengar, and a Muck. Strangely enough, a protocol for the Buried Alive's actions after it has been defeated were never written. In the case of the player defeating him, the game would freeze. However, a specific ending was written by an unknown programmer upon losing the battle. In this ending, the Buried Alive was to have stated,
Finally, fresh meat.
Followed by several lines of gibberish. He was to have then dragged the player character into the ground surrounding him. The scene would have finished with a typical game over screen. However, in the background, an image of the Buried Alive character devouring the player was to have been shown. Especially strange are the protocols for after this scene. The cartridge was to download this image to a small internal memory contained in the Game Boy, overwriting the title screen that normally accompanied a Game Boy turning on. Instead, whenever it was started, the player would view this image as the sound file staticmesh.wave was played. The intended purpose for this effect, unlike many of the other factors leading towards Lavender Town Syndrome, is unknown. As you can see, the story of the Buried Alive model isn't necessarily a story, but instead documentation. The ending of the story is where things get interesting. Notice the last sentence. It directly references Lavender Town Syndrome. Remember that for later. It'll be important. So the story gives us several handfuls of information about this character that appear to be the definitive canonical truth. 1. The character has 2 potential names, Buried Alive and Berryman. For the sake of my own sanity, I'll be referring to him as Berryman. 2. Berryman is male. 3. Berryman was intended to take the place of the Marowak ghost and was found at the top of the Pokemon Tower. 4. Berryman is trapped and lonely. So very lonely. 5. Berryman has 4 Pokemon, 2 being White Hands and the others being a Gengar and a Muk. 6. There is no code for winning against Berryman, but there is code for losing against him. 7. Berryman eats the player character in a traditional game over image if you lose. 8. The Game Boy would download this image to its internal memory, which would overwrite the normal startup screen. And 9. The audio file static mesh.wave plays during the overwritten startup screen. If you visit the Creepypasta wiki page for this story, you'll very likely notice a video present. In said video, the player is seen using a glitch that allows for the Marowak ghost to be skipped using a Pokédoll. After this, they stand near one of the normally non-existent tombstones at the top of the tower, causing a battle against Berryman to start. The player loses, and as you would expect, the alleged game over screen is shown. Interestingly, the description of the video plays it straight. It mentions an actual tutorial on how to do what is shown in the video. I followed the tutorial just to be thorough, doing everything it said to. Naturally, nothing happened, and the tombstones mentioned before simply don't exist. Interestingly though, the code provided actually for some reason disables all other cheats, which I just kind of found interesting. I think the biggest question on my mind when watching this video is, how canon is the video? Well, to start, the first iteration of the page available does not include the video, thus leading me to believe it just straight up isn't. The person responsible for both making the video and adding it to the page go by 7G06DeadBart. They added the video to the page on December 1st of 2012, about 7 months after uploading it to YouTube. While the YouTube user who uploaded the video isn't specifically named 7G06DeadBart, their name is 7G06, which is all the proof you really need. The video also gets a variety of things wrong. Berryman's beginning and ending dialogues aren't word for word from the page, and ignoring all the editing oddities that give away the distinctly lacking authenticity, the game over screen is just a really blurry PNG on a black background. Interestingly, 7G06 decided to use a different static mesh.wave. I say this is interesting because static mesh.wave had existed for well over a year at that point. Despite my criticism, I will give 7G06 a break, for the dialogue issue at least, as it seems English is not their first language, and also this was like 2012. Here's an interesting question for you. Where did this story come from? If you said the Creepypasta wiki, you would be wrong, unfortunately. The earliest instance of the story appearing on the wiki is May 2nd of 2011, and I could easily find an earlier version of it posted on Tumblr, all the way back on July 28th of 2010. It seems that the earliest version, or at least the most popular version of the story, is lost. When I say this, I don't mean we don't know where it came from. What I'm actually trying to say is, the URL where it was located is dead. It leads to a, presumably, completely different site now. Now, you're likely saying the exact same thing I did back when I first tried to make this video. Just check the Wayback Machine. I did do that actually, and the site is excluded from the Wayback Machine. From what little context I could gather by finding where people mention the URL, the page actually hosted the entire Lavender Town Syndrome package. Which does actually explain a lot about why the wiki page is formatted the way it is. It references other creepypastas so casually, like Lavender Town Syndrome and White Hand, because it was originally found presumably on the exact same page as them. This is why I wanted you to remember the story mentioning Lavender Town Syndrome. It explains a lot. I'll leave the URL in the description for the curious minds out there, but be warned that it doesn't work. It just sends you to the homepage of the new site. Finally, I'd like to add that nobody actually knows who wrote the story, from what I can gather at least. Any attempts to locate an author bears no fruit. Perhaps if we could view the site we could find the name. I wonder if the person or persons is still out there. And I also wonder if they even know how much of an impact their writing had on the creepypasta community. So remember that 2 I mentioned earlier? The second reason that the misinformation hurt me? Well, here's why. Queen Cammy. She made the sprites. She's the one who made the version of Berryman and the White Hand that we know today. Before her, there wasn't an official appearance for either of them. Nobody really seems to even know that Queen Cammy made those sprites, and thus she never really gets credit. This is why the whole sprite found in the game files thing ended up bothering me to the extent that it did. The idea that the origin of the sprite is so lost that we've resorted to believing that they're official unused sprites. Imagine being an artist and having someone compare your art to something out of Pokemon Green. I actually went ahead and reached out to Cammy on Twitter to see what she had to say. Apparently there were people who swore they remember seeing Berryman in their game, and she never really expected her art to have the reach that it did. She recounts a time during college where she heard people talking about Buried Alive during lunch, but she was too shy and awkward to approach them. She reached out to the Creepypasta Wiki years ago asking for credit, which thankfully was given, alongside some big Pokemon YouTubers who thankfully complied with their videos. Now, I will admit, for a brief period of time, I may have fallen into the same boat as a lot of people. Back in my first classic video game Creepypastas video, I didn't initially credit Cammy for her work. Thankfully, I realized my mistake a little while after and fixed that. Turns out that not even Cammy knows who wrote the story, so that's a consistent theme at least. People can't ever seem to be given credit for their work when it comes to this creepypasta. So here's something I wanted to mention, just because it seems a bit weird not to, considering how hard I've been thinking about it. I would like to bring up a hypothesis I ended up making after realizing that the language used in the original Lavender Town Syndrome stories is a little bit familiar. In my first classic video game Creepypastas video, I tore the damn thing to pieces because it was just baffling what their explanations for everything was. In particular, the file formats mentioned like .wav, .gif, and .swf. But here's my hypothesis as to why this is. The stories were written by someone whose only experience with making video games happened to be Flash. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't look too deeply into file type choices. I would normally just assume it all was just one big misunderstanding of what the Game Boy is capable of. The inclusion of SWF, however, makes me question that normal line of thinking. Shockwave Flash files are animation files closely associated with Adobe Flash, aka Flash. It's hard to say Flash games / animations weren't prevalent back in 2010 when the story came out. So all of these bits of information come together to form this idea. Obviously the Game Boy doesn't support .swf files, but someone with limited yet existent knowledge of how one could make a video game wouldn't suspect that. It's all they really know, right? The Buried Alive creepypasta is without a doubt one of the most iconic video game creepypastas basically ever. And with how the original story was nothing more than an explanation of Berryman, naturally people began to question if it was real. It wasn't written like a scary story. It was written like a guide or documentation. This actually got me, personally, to fear Berryman. I think it was the idea of this strange, monstrous corpse person capable of emerging from the ground. I would fear that he would, burst through the floor and start attacking me. It was an irrational fear, obviously, but that's the fun of creepypastas. It doesn't have to be grounded in reality for it to be scary or interesting. With the release of Hypno's Lullaby version 2, I feel we'll get a second wave of people who can't tell fact from fiction. Kids scared out of their mind that the scary corpse man is gonna come eat them. It's almost poetic. Much like the source material they're based on, these creepypastas will continue to come back for newer generations to enjoy, and then said newer generation will revive the creepypastas for even newer generations, hopefully creating a silly little cycle. Funny how Buried Alive can't help but continue to resurface. So much for being buried, I guess. Well, there you have it. I had been wanting to make this video for a very long time, but only now am I actually finding success in doing so. I would say Buried Alive is my favorite video game creepypasta, so it was nice to dig a little deeper and find out more about it. A lot of the research I actually did a long time ago, so there really wasn't much for me to do. I'm working on another video currently at the time of making this one, so hopefully the next video won't be so incredibly distant from this one. Shout out to all the people who came from Blame It On Jorge's video, by the way. You guys scare me. YouTube never gave me any notification for any of these new subscribers. Anyways, yeah. Have a fungus. Get back to writing the script, and it's I've been spending way too much time getting through this game just to get to this one point so that I can see something that doesn't exist. It's just ridiculous stuff. I don't get it. What the fuck? What the fuck? No. No, this isn't real. Come on now. Those aren't supposed to be there. Those aren't supposed to be there. Fuck this. Nope. It's not real. Come on. Nope. It's not real. Come on. What the fuck? Excuse me? What? 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 No. What the fuck? What the fuck? Excuse me? What? This isn't real? No. I can't put this in the video. Nope. No, this isn't possible. No. Fuck you. No, this is not real. This is not, no. None of it, no. No. I'm not putting this in the fucking video. This is not going in the fucking video. No. I don't know what the fuck you are, but I'm tired of you doing this shit to me. I should have never made that fucking iceberg video. I should have never even so much as allowed that fucking video to be in anyone's fucking hands. I can't let them see this.